Have you ever been caught in a moment so unexpected, so utterly surreal, that it feels as though the ground beneath you has shifted? That was me, standing at the crossroads of disbelief and emotional chaos, grappling with feelings I couldn't name. This wasn't just any day, it was the day everything changed. Before we dive into this gripping story of unspoken emotions and unexpected connections, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us bring you more thought-provoking stories that explore the complexities of life and relationships. Turn on notifications so you never miss a new upload. Let's get started. It began innocently, as most profound moments often do. A quiet Thursday evening, the kind where exhaustion clings to your skin like a second layer. The kind where the weight of endless chores, errands, and responsibilities leaves you aching for relief. My stepson, Ethan, had just come back from work, his usual bright demeanor lighting up the room. At 24, he had always been the considerate one, the kind of person who could sense a storm brewing in someone else's heart before they even felt the first drop. "You look like you're carrying the world on your shoulders," he remarked, his voice tinged with genuine concern. I smiled faintly, brushing away his worry. "Just a long day," I murmured, though the pain in my lower back made every movement a trial. Ethan wasn't convinced. He stepped closer, his presence steady and warm, like an anchor in a turbulent sea. "If it's your back again, I could help," he offered. "I've been watching tutorials on massages. It might make you feel better." His words caught me off guard. The thought of him helping me, even in such an innocent way, felt oddly intimate. But the sincerity in his eyes and the gentle determination in his voice made it hard to refuse. "Are you sure?" I asked, hesitating as an inexplicable nervousness began to rise. "Of course," he said with a small smile. "You do so much for everyone. Let me take care of you for a change." Those words stayed with me, lingering like the echo of a melody I couldn't forget. His kindness wasn't new. Ethan had always been thoughtful. But tonight, there was something deeper in the way he spoke, a tenderness that brushed against my heart in ways I wasn't prepared for. I settled on the couch, pulling my hair up into a loose bun, while Ethan disappeared briefly before returning with a bottle of lotion. His every movement was deliberate yet unassuming, as though he was carefully navigating uncharted waters. As his hands touched my shoulders, warm and firm, I felt a wave of relief and something else. A surge of emotions I couldn't quite name began to rise, catching me off guard. Was it gratitude, vulnerability, or something far more dangerous? "Relax," he murmured, his voice low and soothing. But how could I? Each movement of his hands seemed to draw out not only the knots in my back, but also the tightly wound emotions I had buried for so long. A strange mix of comfort and unease settled over me, and suddenly the quiet room felt alive with unspoken tension. That night was the beginning of a shift I could neither anticipate nor explain. Ethan's kindness, so familiar yet suddenly charged, left me questioning everything I thought I knew about the world and myself. It was a Thursday night, the kind of evening where the weight of the day clings to your body, dragging you down with an unrelenting force. Every muscle in my back screamed for relief, a sharp ache that had become my unwelcome companion after weeks of nonstop work. As I sank into the couch, exhaustion hit me like a tidal wave. Just as I thought I could finally steal a moment of peace, my stepson, Daniel, entered the room. His easy smile and warm energy filled the space. But tonight, there was something different in his gaze, a hint of concern that caught me off guard. "Are you okay, Claire?" he asked, his voice soft but steady. At 25, Daniel had grown into the kind of man who could read the smallest cracks in a person's armor. He was thoughtful and empathetic, the type of person who always showed up when you least expected, but most needed him. I tried to downplay the discomfort, managing a tired smile. "Just my back again," I said, shifting slightly, though the movement only intensified the pain. I must have overdone it today. Daniel frowned, his brows knitting together in that way that reminded me of how much he cared. "You've been dealing with this for too long," he said, sitting down across from me. "I can help, you know. I've been watching some massage techniques online. It's nothing professional, but it might take the edge off." His offer surprised me, a gesture so simple yet unexpectedly intimate. I hesitated, unsure why my heart seemed to quicken at his words. "Are you sure?" I asked, feeling a strange mix of vulnerability and curiosity. He nodded with a reassuring smile. "You do everything for everyone else. Let me take care of you for once." His words struck a chord, pulling at something deep inside me. I couldn't remember the last time someone had said that to me, let alone meant it. Reluctantly, I agreed, and Daniel quickly disappeared into the bathroom, returning with a bottle of lotion. His movements were careful, deliberate, as though he understood the delicate nature of what he was offering. "Just relax," he said gently, sitting behind me on the couch. As his hands pressed against my shoulders, warmth spread through me, melting away the tension I'd been carrying. At first, it was purely physical, a relief I hadn't felt in weeks. But as the moments passed, a strange, unnameable emotion began to build. His touch, firm yet gentle, was unlike anything I expected. It wasn't just care, it was connection. "You're really good at this," I said, half joking, though my voice wavered slightly. He chuckled softly. "Told you those tutorials might come in handy," he replied. His hands moved lower, just above the small of my back, and I felt a shiver ripple through me, not from the massage, but from the quiet tension that seemed to settle between us. I told myself it was nothing. This was Daniel, my stepson, the boy I'd known since he was a teenager, but deep down I knew something had shifted, and I wasn't sure I was ready to face what that meant. It had started innocently enough, a simple gesture of kindness from someone I trusted deeply. But as the evening unfolded, something unspoken began to linger in the air, an invisible tension that clung to every word, every glance. It was supposed to be just a massage, a thoughtful offer from Liam, my 24-year-old stepson, who had always been the embodiment of kindness and care. Yet, as his hands moved across my back, a tide of emotions I couldn't name began to rise, threatening to pull me under. I remember the way he looked at me that evening, his hazel eyes full of concern as I winced while sitting down. "Your back's been bothering you again, hasn't it?" he asked, his tone both gentle and firm. I nodded, offering a weak smile. "Just a long day," I murmured, trying to dismiss it. But Liam wasn't the type to let things slide. "You've been dealing with this for weeks," he said, moving closer. "Let me help. I've been learning some massage techniques. I promise it'll help." His words were sincere, his intentions pure, but something about the offer made my pulse quicken. Perhaps it was the way he spoke, his voice softer than usual, or the way his presence seemed to fill the room with a warmth I hadn't noticed before. "Are you sure?" I asked, hesitating as an unfamiliar nervousness began to creep in. "Of course," he replied with a reassuring smile. "You've done so much for me over the years. It's the least I can do." I agreed, though my heart was already racing for reasons I couldn't understand. As I pulled my hair into a loose bun, Liam disappeared briefly, returning with a bottle of lotion. His every movement was deliberate, careful, as though he understood the weight of what he was about to do. "Just relax," he said softly, his voice almost a whisper. His hands were warm as they pressed against my shoulders, his touch firm, yet impossibly gentle. At first, it was exactly what I needed. The tension in my muscles began to melt away, replaced by a soothing warmth. But then, something shifted. His hands lingered a second too long, his movements becoming slower, more deliberate. The air between us grew thick, heavy with an unspoken energy that neither of us dared to acknowledge. "Wow, you're really good at this," I said, my voice trembling slightly despite my attempt to keep things light. Liam chuckled, but his laugh carried an undertone I couldn't quite place. "Told you I've been practicing," he said, his hands moving lower, just above the small of my back. A shiver ran through me, not from relief, but from something far deeper, something I didn't want to name. I told myself I was imagining things, that this was nothing more than an innocent act of care. But as the silence stretched between us, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were teetering on the edge of something we couldn't come back from. And in that moment, the line between what was and what could be blurred in a way that left me breathless. For days, the air between us felt charged, as if a silent storm brewed just beneath the surface. I couldn't shake the memory of that evening, how his hands lingered a moment too long, how his words seemed heavier than their surface meaning. Ethan, my 23-year-old stepson, had always been thoughtful and caring, but lately his actions carried a weight I couldn't ignore. And the worst part? I couldn't tell if the shift was his, mine, or something we were both unwilling to name. The days after his massage offer blurred together, filled with fleeting glances and unspoken words. Ethan seemed the same on the surface, his usual charming self, quick with a smile or a joke. But there were moments, fleeting yet potent, when his gaze lingered just a second too long, or his voice softened in a way that made my heart race. I told myself I was imagining it, that I was overthinking every interaction. Yet, deep down, I knew better. One afternoon I stood in the kitchen, hands submerged in soapy water, trying to focus on the mundane task of washing dishes. The sound of his footsteps behind me sent a jolt through my body, my breath catching before I forced myself to relax. "Need any help?" Ethan's voice broke the silence, his tone casual but laced with something I couldn't quite place. I shook my head, keeping my focus on the sink. "I'm fine, just finishing up here." He didn't leave. Instead, he leaned against the counter, his presence an undeniable weight in the small kitchen. "You've been quiet lately," he said, his words cutting through the air like a knife. "Is everything okay?" My heart pounded in my chest as I struggled to come up with a response. "Of course," I replied too quickly, the words tumbling out before I could stop them. "Just tired, that's all." But even as I spoke, I knew he didn't believe me. Ethan's gaze was steady, his eyes searching mine as though he could see the turmoil I was trying so desperately to hide. "You sure?" he asked, his voice softer now. "Because it feels like, I don't know, like something's different." The lump in my throat grew and I couldn't bring myself to look at him. "I'm fine," I said again, but the words felt hollow. He sighed, pushing himself off the counter. "If you ever want to talk, I'm here," he said quietly before walking away, leaving me alone with the weight of everything unsaid. That evening, the tension reached its breaking point. Ethan and I sat in the living room, the silence between us heavy and oppressive. "Are we okay?" he asked suddenly, his voice pulling me out of my thoughts. I looked at him, my heart aching at the vulnerability in his eyes. "Of course," I lied, forcing a smile I didn't feel. But the truth was undeniable. Whatever had shifted between us wasn't going away. It hung in the air, an invisible thread binding us together in ways I didn't understand. And as much as I wanted to untangle it, I wasn't sure I knew how or if I even wanted to. The quiet between us grew heavier with each passing day, like a fog settling over the house that neither of us dared to address. What had started as an innocent moment, a gesture of kindness, had spiraled into something unspoken, yet impossible to ignore. My stepson, Ryan, was 24, a thoughtful and empathetic young man who had always been there when I needed him. But now, his presence carried a weight I couldn't quite define, and the tension between us felt like a thread stretched taut, ready to snap. It was late one Friday evening when he caught me off guard again. I had been folding laundry in the living room, lost in thought, when Ryan walked in. He moved with a casual confidence, his hands shoved into the pockets of his sweatpants, but his eyes carried an intensity that made my heart quicken. "You've been quiet lately," he said, his voice soft but probing. "Is everything okay?" I froze for a moment, fumbling with the shirt in my hands as I tried to gather my thoughts. "I'm fine," I replied, though my voice betrayed me, trembling just enough to make him tilt his head in concern. Just a lot on my mind. Ryan nodded slowly, stepping closer. You don't have to keep everything bottled up, you know, he said, sitting down on the couch beside me. His tone was calm, steady, but the way his eyes locked onto mine sent a shiver down my spine. You've always been the one holding this family together. Maybe it's time someone takes care of you for a change. His words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. I wanted to brush them off, to laugh and change the subject, but the sincerity in his voice made it impossible. That's sweet of you to say, I murmured, folding the shirt with trembling hands. But I'm fine, really. Ryan didn't look convinced. Instead, he leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees as he studied me with an intensity that made my pulse race. I just feel like something's changed between us, he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. And I don't want to lose what we have. My breath hitched at his words, a wave of emotion crashing over me that I couldn't quite name. Panic? Confusion? Or something far more dangerous? Ryan, we're fine, I said quickly, my voice firmer now as I tried to regain control. Nothing's changed. But we both knew that wasn't true. The silence that followed was thick, charged with unspoken words and lingering glances. Finally, Ryan stood up, running a hand through his hair. If you say so, he said, his tone soft but filled with a quiet resignation. I just needed to say that. As he walked away, I sat there, my heart pounding in my chest. What had started as a simple act of kindness had unraveled into something far more complex, leaving me questioning everything. And the worst part, deep down I knew there was no going back to the way things were. The days passed in a haze, each one more strained than the last. Every interaction felt like walking on a tightrope, each step threatening to send us tumbling into an abyss we both feared yet couldn't ignore. Noah, my 25-year-old stepson, had always been someone I trusted implicitly. His kindness and unwavering support were constants in my life. But now, those very qualities felt like threads pulling us toward a place neither of us dared to acknowledge. It was during dinner one evening that the tension became impossible to ignore. The air was thick with unspoken words as we sat across from each other. The clinking of silverware was the only sound, punctuating the silence that had settled over us like a storm cloud. Noah looked up from his plate, his expression unreadable, and for a moment, our eyes met. My heart skipped a beat, the intensity of his gaze sending a shiver through me. "You've been quiet lately," he said softly, his voice breaking the silence. "I feel like you're avoiding me." His words hit me like a blow, and I struggled to compose myself. "I'm not avoiding you," I replied, my tone defensive, though I knew it wasn't entirely true. "I've just been busy." He leaned back in his chair, studying me with a mix of concern and frustration. "It's more than that," he said, his voice quieter now. "I can feel it. Something's changed, hasn't it?" I looked away, unable to meet his eyes. My mind raced as I tried to find the right words, but everything felt inadequate. "Noah," I began, my voice trembling, "I don't know what you're talking about." He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "You do," he said simply. "We both do." The weight of his words settled over me, and I felt my defenses crumbling. He wasn't wrong. Something had shifted between us. It was in the way his presence lingered in my thoughts, in the way my heart raced whenever he was near, but admitting it, even to myself, felt like crossing a line I wasn't ready to approach. "I don't want things to be weird between us," he continued, his tone earnest. "I value what we have too much to let it slip away." His vulnerability took me by surprise, and for a moment, all I wanted was to reassure him, to tell him that everything was fine. But the truth was, I didn't know how to fix this. The connection we shared had grown into something unrecognizable, and it scared me. "Noah, I can't." My voice broke, and I shook my head, trying to hold back the wave of emotions threatening to overwhelm me. He nodded slowly, his expression pained, yet understanding. "I get it," he said softly, "but I had to say something. I couldn't keep pretending." As he stood to leave, I felt a pang of regret, but I didn't stop him. The space between us had become a chasm, filled with unspoken emotions that neither of us knew how to bridge. And as the door closed behind him, I realized the storm we were caught in wasn't over. It was just beginning. The tension between us had become an almost tangible presence, filling every shared moment with a charged energy that neither of us could ignore. It was in the way we moved around each other, careful yet magnetic, as though an invisible force was pulling us closer, despite the barriers we both tried to maintain. My stepson, Caleb, 24 years old, had always been a pillar of kindness and maturity. But recently, our relationship had shifted in ways I didn't fully understand, leaving me questioning everything. One evening, as the household settled into its usual quiet, Caleb approached me in the living room. I was curled up on the couch with a book, the pages blurring as my thoughts drifted back to the growing unease between us. "Hey," he said softly, his voice cutting through the silence. I looked up, startled by the intensity in his eyes. "Can we talk?" There was something about his tone, calm but insistent, that made my heart race. I nodded, closing the book and setting it aside. "What's on your mind?" I asked, though I already had an idea of where this conversation might lead. He sat down on the couch, closer than he needed to, his presence a steady warmth that sent a shiver through me. "I don't want things to be weird between us," he began, his words measured but tinged with vulnerability. "But lately, it feels like there's this tension, and I don't know how to fix it." I felt my breath catch, his words striking at the heart of what I had been trying to avoid. "Caleb, nothing's wrong," I said quickly, though my voice wavered. "Maybe we're just overthinking things." He shook his head, his gaze never leaving mine. "It's not just me, is it?" he asked softly, the weight of his question settling heavily between us. "I see the way you look at me, the way you avoid being alone with me. And I don't blame you. I feel it too." Panic rose in my chest as his words hung in the air, impossible to dismiss. "Caleb, stop," I said, my voice trembling. This isn't something we can talk about." "But we have to," he insisted, his tone pleading now. "Pretending it isn't there won't make it go away." I stood abruptly, putting distance between us, as I struggled to regain control of my emotions. "This can't happen," I said firmly, though my resolve was already crumbling. "You're my stepson. This is wrong." Caleb rose too, his expression a mix of frustration and pain. "I know that," he said quietly, "but it doesn't change how I feel, and I don't think it changes how you feel either." His words cut through me like a blade, exposing truths I wasn't ready to confront. "I think you should go," I said finally, my voice breaking. "We need space-time to figure this out." He nodded, his shoulders slumping as he took a step back. "If that's what you need," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "But it isn't over, is it?" As he walked away, the weight of his question lingered in the room, pressing down on me like a storm cloud. I knew he was right. Whatever this was, it wasn't over, and the thought both terrified and thrilled me in equal measure. The house felt unusually quiet that evening, the kind of silence that carries an unspoken weight. I was standing in the kitchen, chopping vegetables for dinner, when Julian walked in. My 23-year-old stepson had just come back from his evening run, his hair damp with sweat and his face glowing from the exertion. He grabbed a glass of water and leaned against the counter, watching me with a small smile. "You've been working all day," he said softly. "Let me help." I glanced up at him, startled by the offer. "I've got it, really," I replied, keeping my focus on the task at hand. But Julian didn't move. Instead, he set his glass down and stepped closer, his presence warm and grounding. "You don't have to do everything alone, you know," he said, his tone carrying a quiet insistence. The sincerity in his voice caught me off guard. Julian had always been thoughtful, the kind of person who noticed the small details others missed. But lately, there was something different in the way he interacted with me, a certain intensity that I couldn't ignore. "It's just dinner," I said lightly, hoping to deflect the moment. "I'm fine." But I wasn't fine. My heart raced as he lingered nearby, the space between us charged with an energy I couldn't quite name. "You don't look fine," Julian said, his gaze steady. "You've been distant lately, and I can't help but feel like it's because of me." His words hit me like a punch to the gut, and I froze, the knife hovering over the cutting board. "Julian, that's not true," I said quickly, though my voice betrayed me. "I've just been tired, that's all." "Is it really just that?" he pressed, his voice softer now, "because it feels like there's more to it. And I think you know what I'm talking about." The air between us grew heavy, and I felt my pulse quicken as his words sank in. "I don't know what you mean," I said, though the tremor in my voice gave me away. Julian stepped closer, his expression filled with a mix of frustration and vulnerability. "You do," he said quietly. "There's been something between us, and pretending it isn't there won't make it go away." I turned away from him, gripping the edge of the counter as I tried to steady myself. "Julian, this isn't something we can talk about," I said firmly, though my resolve was already cracking. "It's not right." He exhaled deeply, his voice barely above a whisper. "I know, but that doesn't change how I feel, and I don't think it changes how you feel either." The truth in his words made my chest tighten, and I struggled to hold back the wave of emotions threatening to overwhelm me. "We can't do this," I said, my voice breaking. "You need to leave." Julian hesitated, his expression torn, before nodding slowly. "If that's what you want," he said quietly. "But it doesn't feel over." As he walked away, his words echoed in my mind, leaving me to grapple with the storm of emotions he'd stirred. Deep down, I knew he was right, whatever this was. It wasn't over, and I wasn't sure if I was ready for what came next. The story serves as a poignant reminder of the delicate boundaries in human relationships and the importance of self-awareness. It highlights how unresolved emotions and unspoken connections can lead us into morally complex situations, challenging our sense of right and wrong. Ultimately, it teaches the value of confronting difficult feelings with honesty and restraint, recognizing the impact our choices have on others and ourselves. Life often tests us in unexpected ways, and this story underscores the need for inner strength and the courage to prioritize respect, trust, and the preservation of meaningful relationships above fleeting emotions.